Welcome to California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance, coming to you from Sacramento, California, and we are joined by the GOP leader in the California State Senate. His name is Bob Huff. You know him well. And I want to speak with you about education. Since I've known you, you've been looking at trying to propose and pass good, common sense education reforms. The most recent one dealt with the flurry of layoff notices that teachers and other educational staffs were receiving during the downturn. My aunt got one, actually, and she actually got two. 1 year it got rescinded, the next year it went into effect. So talk to us about the whole process and what you're trying to do.
State law requires that if a school is going to let go of a teacher, they have to notify that teacher by March 15th.
Okay.
Which is well and good. That gives teachers a long time to think about it, perhaps put the feelers out and find a job. The problem is schools don't really know what their budget's going to be like March 15th.
Because?
Because the governor puts out the preliminary budget in January, but the May revision is generally more focused. And so school districts look at that as like, how much money are we going to get? And so my bill would have put in line more of that timing to the budget so that we don't go through all this artificial churning of the workforce and creating all this angst.
It would seem to me that if I were a teacher, I would want the deadline pushed to where it could seem more definitive. I mean, to receive a notice on, let's say, March 15th, and then to have it rescinded on May 15th or June 15th, whatever it is. I mean, that's tremendous anxiety.
It's like cruel and unusual punishment.
One could argue, right? One could argue. Yeah. But for whatever reason, and maybe you can enlighten us, the bill died.
Right.
The bill did die in committee. What happened?
Well, the only opposition against it, but I shouldn't say only because it's very substantive,
right,
were the school unions.
The CTA.
Exactly. And they're arm in arm. It wasn't just the CTA, but any union that represents a school employee. Right. They all tend to come together to oppose these things, but they opposed it. And one could argue, because I've pondered, I've heard from young teachers that go through this. Some have left the workforce because I just can't go through this every year. And it drives people crazy, but the unions like to keep pressure on the budget. So even though the notice is meaningless because there's no data to drive it, the schools have to over-notify. Otherwise, it takes them a full year before they can go through that again. And when you don't have the money to pay the bills, that's a significant timeline.
Is there a cost to the noticing?
There is a cost. It's estimated that it was running, I'm going to say $700
Yeah,
each.
I mean, it seems like at some level, there was an example you offered me. In San Jose, 32 teachers cost $29,000.
Legislative analysts put it at $700, I believe it was. This school district was in testifying that, it was a little bit, it was around that amount of money, and then they didn't actually end up letting anybody go. So that was in their case, $29,000 that could have gone into the classroom, could have gone for much needed, and instead it's just, off in the wind with nothing other than they've created some angst in the workforce.
Now, as I understand it, the Senate Education Committee, it is dominated by Democrats, 7 Dems, 2 Reaps, yet not every Dem voted against it.
I actually had the chairman, Carol Liu, and I had Lou Correa from Orange County that supported my position.
So you were close.
I was close.
5-4, is that right?
One more vote.
Yeah.
One more vote got it out of committee.
Do you feel as if that you could bring this back, or is it just one of those issues that to get that just one vote is really going to be the killer?
This is interesting. That one vote is the killer.
Right.
I mean, there's a reason why this committee is so packed, much more than what our numbers are.
Right. Usually it's more like a 60-40 split, not as
or even 70-30. But this is very egregious and a tough threshold. Before we lost numbers from 15 down to 11 over the redistricting. Now we're up to 12.
Well, when we come back, I want to continue our conversation about education, about the budget. For our viewers on HLN, we thank you for joining us. For our other viewers, we'll be right back. So, sir, let's talk about the budget, if we may. It's interesting. I receive your press releases religiously. I enjoy reading them very much. And it does seem that the Senate Republicans were pleasantly surprised by the governor's budget, or at least at some level thought it was a fine starting point. At some level, it seems as if the Senate Republicans and the governor are better friends than some of the Assembly Democrats and the governor. But be that as it may, what would you say about the budget?
Well, one could argue this is a Republican budget. These are the principles, for the most part, that we have been advocating for some years now, and the governor finds himself the most conservative vote when it comes to the budget matters. Now this is a majority vote budget. So he has to draw the strong, conservative, let's be prudent fiscal guys rather than the Republicans in the room, but we're happy he's taken our ideas.
Right. So that being said, when we look at the budget, it's undeniable that boy, the economic situation is so different than it was a couple of years ago. I mean, we had a deficit of almost $27 billion. Now we have a surplus, it looks like over $4 billion. Do you buy that, first of all? I mean, are we really in much better shape?
We are in much better shape, and ironically, Prop 30, that was what raised the taxes, in hindsight, wasn't necessary. Some of us said that
Some have
at the
said
time.
that, yes.
Now the governor quickly segues and says, well, we got this debt, which is true, but there are economists that will say that you can come out of recovery better by cutting back the scope of government rather than growing it, and we did just the opposite. We're continuing to grow government jobs.
So that being said, if Prop 30 wasn't needed, or if it was, we don't know, but what we do know is we have a surplus. Should we look at cutting taxes right now?
I think we should be looking at cutting taxes. In fact, the Dems are doing a little two-step over there to make sure they don't get too much reserve, because there's evidently something on the books that says they have to kick back some sales tax if it reaches a 4% surplus.
Interesting.
So they will encumber enough to make sure it doesn't hit that threshold, but we should definitely, I mean, Prop 30 is the law of the land. We should be using that money to pay down the debt, because that is a real number when you're looking at the underfunded pensions and all the other things that are just out there waiting to
Well, let's talk about the debt, because the governor has been very clear that he wants to really tear down that wall of debt, his term of art. One of the ways that you tear down that wall of debt is you pay it off, and there's some of that going on in the proposed budget, but you also can look at creating a reserve. And so if the wall of debt starts to build up, that may be a place that you can turn. We know that there are competing proposals for a rainy day fund. What can you tell us about the rainy day fund that has been proposed by the governor? There's one that's also been proposed, ACA 4. Where are you on the rainy day fund issue?
I think the voters ought to have an up-down vote on ACA 4. It was part of a bipartisan budget back in, I think, 2009. Kind of lose track.
Right.
But the Democrats have kicked it off. They found out they could do that by majority vote, and they don't need our vote to kick it down the road, so it may never come to a vote. But that was actually a very robust rainy day fund that looked back and had sort of an average of how much you put aside.
Right, and let me ask you about that, because you described it well. It is an average. How much money should put into the reserve based upon looking at trends.
Right.
The governor's rainy day proposal doesn't look at averages. He wants to zero in on capital gains and use that as the barometer for how much the state should put aside. What do you think about that formula?
I think the formula that we had made more sense because it balances all sources of revenue, because, I mean, sometimes things get out of whack, and certainly capital gains are something that aren't steady from year to year, and we'd have to take a look at it. I just know ACA 4 was something that didn't happen overnight. There was a lot of thought that went into it. It was well crafted. It was a bipartisan agreement. We just ought to have a vote on that. I think we would find that a lot more robust, again, to use that word, than the governor's.
At the same time, we do have a rainy day fund mechanism. It's called Prop 58, and yet we're really not funding Prop 58. We haven't for years. And so how do we know that if ACA 4 passes, or if a version of it passes, that we would fund it?
Well, ACA 4 tried to build upon the weaknesses of the previous version, because you find out what the loopholes are, because attorneys find ways to exploit them. And certainly ACA 4...
Attorneys do. I know, I'm one.
Well, there you go. That explains a lot.
A ton. But would ACA 4 kind of plug that loophole? Because in the final analysis, it's great to have a rainy day fund, but if it's not being funded, what's the point?
Well, there's no rainy day fund if it doesn't work. So yeah, we believe ACA 4 would plug that.
So to get it to the ballot, it needs to pass the legislature, is that right?
It's already passed the legislature. They just have to put it on the ballot. See, they moved it, so it's currently set, I think it's set for a vote in 2014.
I think you're right.
They will likely kick it off to something else.
We'll see.
Or they'll come up with something else and say, this is the new rainy day.
Okay, his name is Bob Huff. He is the GOP leader in the California State Senate. My name is Brad Pomerance. This is California Edition. Welcome back to California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Our guest, Curt Hagman, member of the California State Assembly. He also recently announced he's a candidate for the Board of Supervisors in San Bernardino County. Sir, thank you so much for joining us. I know you have children of high school age. I know your son is taking classes in computer science. And you recently learned that computer science really doesn't get the respect it deserves.
It's a good way of putting it.
Yeah,
we checked in, and to become a teacher, you get a degree in pretty much anything with a teaching credential, except for computer science. And then if you look at your different electives, you can take computer software, but not part of your core classes.
Sir, this blows my mind. We're in California. We have Silicon Valley, which in some ways has saved this state from an even worse fate than it would have a few years back. You would think if any state would give computer science the respect it's due, it would be California.
You would hope.
Yeah, and so somehow, some way, and look, my guess is it's really a fluke of history. It's just these codes were written years ago, and
they take a long time for our bureaucracy to catch up with the modern times. And since the colleges don't accept it as an A through G requirement course, most high schools only can put it on as elective because they're focused on getting kids accepted to UC. I mean, so it's almost kind of this top-down approach we have to take.
Couldn't one argue that computer science is more important than biology, physics, chemistry? I mean, couldn't one argue?
Absolutely. It's one of the top 5 growth sectors in California. The other 5 are all mostly medical related at this point for the next 20 years. And so I think we should encourage that to happen.
So you actually want to take affirmative action to make this happen.
Correct.
So you're looking at this as a state issue. Why don't you tell us what you're proposing?
Sure. Well, the first bill is to ask the state board to make a core curriculum class. And based on programming, not just computer usage, but programming, which will make it more of a hard science than just how to use Microsoft Word.
So does that mean it would be added to the A through G requirements?
Correct. It can be a substitute for one of the math or science classes. The second thing is get the UC regents and the Cal State regents to approve that as being one of the courses coming in. So those are 2 separate bills. We've also authored a bill that will allow a student who exhausts all his local ability at the school to take a computer science class to concurrent enroll in community college as well to take those classes.
And have it apply for high school credits.
Correct. And then lastly, we're also authoring a bill to allow, I mean, you're not going to have teachers to be able to teach this unless you allow them to become teachers as computer science degrees. So we're hoping to get that. I don't know why they excluded that.
Have you spoken with the superintendent, Tom Torlakson? Is this something that he needs to get on board, or where are we on this?
Yes, it's like I wanted to start at the school level and work my way up.
Oh, that's true.
Found out that
California School Boards Association?
Yes, I found out that's more likely because they're all for this. Most school boards will want this, but they don't have the ability to really count it on their own. So we have to go through the UC and Cal States first. So that's where we start with the
you have to go top down, not bottom up.
Exactly.
What about, I have to ask, the California Teachers Association, the CTA, are they
I haven't got a response yet. We're still working on the rough language. Then we have to go knock on everybody's door, and I'm hoping they'd be embracing something like this.
It's also surprising in that we know so many schools are now adopting tablets requiring
Common Core. You have to take the test next year.
Yeah, Common Core. I mean, adaptive testing, you can only have adaptive testing for standardized tests if you're on a computer. And so talk to me. So what's going to happen next? I mean, it's inspired, if I may say. What happens next?
Well, we got the 4 different bills language coming back. We'll take it around the stakeholders. It's still fairly early. In fact, we haven't got the language out. I've actually talked to my chair of education, Joan Buchanan.
Sure.
She's very much in favor of these things. She's helping give advice. I'm hoping to get them as, once the language come out, as co-authors. So we have bipartisan bills coming out. There may be steps in the way that we don't know of that we may have to work our way through. So it's a very early process. I'm hoping a month from now we'll be fully selling away.
I hear you. When we come back, let's talk more about what's going on in the state of California. For our viewers on HLN, we thank you so much for joining us. For our other viewers, we'll be right back. So, Mr. Hagman, I want to talk more about what's happening in Sacramento. As you know, if I may say, we have a proposal for a budget by the governor. I wanted to talk to you about the budget proposal. What's your sense of what's happening in Sacramento now fiscally?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we have more money to spend because we voted ourselves the largest tax increase last year. We have extra $5 or $6 billion to spend, and I think the governor's doing a very prudent way of spending it right now. Not saying we're going to spend it all on ongoing programs, but put some money away, pay down some debt, Put some in for rainy day. Now he has to face the legislature, who always likes to spend more than they have. So, but right now I'm very happy with what the governor came out with so far.
I want to talk to you about the rainy day fund because it does seem to be really the issue du jour. For whatever reason, this is what the mainstream press is covering, front page of the LA Times, and it really is becoming a focal point. The governor has made it very clear that he wants to see a rainy day fund passed. I understand, but we have passed a rainy day fund. I mean, Prop 56, I believe, was the number in 2004. Prop 58, I should say. That was passed. And so if we have a rainy day fund, why are we talking about this now?
You have to fund the rainy day fund.
Okay, explain.
So it's the difference between stating that we want to have one. That's like we want every teacher or every student to go to UC and actually making it happen. You still have to allocate the funds for it. So he knows he got 7 years of this extra tax he's got coming into California right now.
And actually only 3 left for half the tax, which is
Correct.
The sales tax side.
So let's get that, put some of it away. So as incomes go up and down based on our economy, we're not so going back and forth like a yo-yo. And that's what our California budget's been going on for a long time. There's a lot of truth to be said about 2-year budgets, amortizing this stuff out, trying to get a more stabilized approach to this. A lot of my colleagues on the Democrat side are saying, hey, we're not up to the levels we need to be at yet. Now's not the time to put money away. So that'll be the internal battles right now.
The governor has attempted, and we spoke about this with Mr. Huff earlier in the show, to seed the Ready Day Fund with about, I think it's $1.5 billion. The Democrats, at least some of them, you would say that's too much. Some of your colleagues on the Republican side say that's too little. So where are we on at least seeding this Rainy Day Fund?
I think $1 billion or so sends a good signal to the investors who buy California bonds, invest in California businesses. That is a serious amount. If you threw a few $100 million in there, compared to our overall $100 billion budget, it's very symbolic. I
want to talk to you about another issue in the budget, and I ask you this because you are running for the Board of Supervisors, and that is the question about prisons.
Yep.
We've talked about this before, sir. You know that we have a program called realignment, and what that does is it takes lower level offenders from the state and has them serve their time in local county jails. If you're a supervisor, you'll be living realignment all day, every day. The governor is looking to try to get the realignment program in place in such a way that it's not impacting counties as severely as some feel that they're impacted. But we have a federal court that's been they're threatening to hold the governor in contempt.
Correct.
And so where are you on the question of realignment?
Well, I think you're not going to reverse it, but modifications have to happen. 109 policy has been disastrous. Crime rates up in almost every city. I heard from my contract cities.
Right. Although I hear that, interestingly, that some crime is up, some of the petty crimes, but not so much the more serious crimes.
Yeah.
No crime is good.
Yeah.
No crime is good.
And are they spending their time chasing the lower crime and not working on the higher crimes too?
Hard to know.
But some of the ideas I've heard about capping the number of years in county jail to like 4 or 5,
right.
I think it's a great start. I think we're going to have to look at post-conviction type of programs. You can do home arrest with GPS, with other programs like other states do. I think there needs to be a lot more tools in all these boxes in each county.
Yeah, and you work in law enforcement.
Yeah.
I mean, your day job or your former day job was in bail, is that
yeah,
right?
Yeah, so I have the whole spectrum.
Yeah. So you understand the severity of this question. What we do know is, as we speak today, the state had been negotiating with the prison advocates to try to come to a solution that would satisfy both parties and the federal court to decrease the size of the prison population. Those negotiations fell apart. And so now it's back to the federal court, who at any time could say
release.
Release.
And I would argue that there's some reason to maybe look at the ones who've been serving 25 years to maybe let them out 4 or 5 years early.
Interesting.
Versus the ones that are coming in to serve because we arrest someone today, they're out tomorrow.
Right.
It doesn't deter bad behavior.
The governor has proposed paroling elderly, seriously ill. Yeah. What do you think of that?
No, I've actually voted for that in the past. As long as they can be qualified not to harm the public. Our job is to try to get the worst of the worst off the streets so our public are safe.
And if the federal court says release, the governor said no can do, and he will want to spend more money to put these individuals in different facilities, which is expensive.
Out of state and all the rest of it. There's a lot of ways we can do it. I've actually proposed several bills in the past that give some solutions to this. I hope they take another look at it.
Okay, his name is Curt Hagman. He's a member of the California State Assembly, candidate for Board of Supervisors in San Bernardino County. I'm Brad Pomerance. We'll be right back on California Edition. California edition coming to you from Sacramento, the state's capital. I'm Brad Pomerance, and we are joined by Brian Maienschein. He is a member of the California State Assembly. And so I'd like to speak with you about sexual offenses, which I think are amongst the most just horrific, horrendous offense anyone could commit against any other human being. In the past year, I've been speaking with one of your colleagues, Kacho Ashajian, about a loophole that came to his attention that dealt with rape by impersonation. And apparently, under the state law dating back to the 1800s, that was not seen as a serious offense, and as a result, folks were getting off essentially scot-free. That has been closed by the legislature. The court said, please close this, and they did. You have found another loophole.
Absolutely. My bill will make it a very serious offense for those rapists who take advantage of people with developmental, physical, and mental disabilities.
What's the loophole? Because it is shocking, but yet you can see how it happened.
It is shocking. Right. I mean, under current law, basically what they were requiring was, in essence, the victim to prove that they didn't consent.
Right.
Well,
you need to prove lack of consent, for any rape.
Right.
And so that's the problem. What if someone can't consent?
And exactly. If someone, because of a physical disability, a mental disability, whatever it is, they are unable to communicate that, it still doesn't mean they weren't raped. Rape is rape no matter who the victim is. And the state shouldn't be discriminating between what status the victim is to decide if a rape has occurred.
I understand at one of the hearings, a gentleman testified. Tell us about him and his absolutely outrageous, horrifying experience.
It really was very emotional. I think everybody who was at the hearing was very affected by it. There was a 62-year-old gentleman in there with very severe cerebral palsy, and he had a very difficult time communicating. And you could tell he was still traumatized by the rape that he had gone through when he was younger. And this is exactly what we're trying to get at with this bill: is that person, that child, that young man or woman shouldn't be violated because they're just physically unable to communicate. That shouldn't make a difference.
And in that case, his perpetrator received a sentence of 8 years, when if it had been a more traditional rape conviction, it could have been 25 to life.
Exactly.
Another case that was brought to your attention is even more maddening. As both of us, the father of 2 daughters, tell us about this 14-year-old girl.
Yeah, this one is just so brutal to even really hear the facts of. But there was a man, a rapist, who was raping repeatedly his 14-year-old stepdaughter, even filming it. I mean, it was just horrifying on probably 100 different levels.
Right.
And he really, the judge, when he came up for trial, the judge was, you could tell the judge was just so frustrated that he couldn't sentence him.
Now, this daughter had cerebral palsy, so again, could not verbalize her lack of consent.
Exactly. And so these perpetrators are using this loophole to try to get out of their crime. They're already preying on the weakest victims anyway. The judge wanted to sentence him to longer, but said, my hands are tied. I can only sentence you to 8 years. Under my bill, it would make this crime eligible for 21 strike, 25 to life. This person shouldn't be out. They shouldn't see the light of day. And I hope they do go away for a very long time.
What's remarkable about this bill is we're in an era of realignment and a federal court squeezing the state to decrease the size of the prison population. It's been very difficult to get any bill out that increases jail time. You got it out of public safety, which is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I've worked hard on this. I think people, my colleagues, see the value of this. Look, I think this, the highest priority of the state is protected citizens. And yes, is it expensive to put people in jail? It is. But these people are crying out to go to jail. They should be in jail, so we protect all the people that in our state from perpetrators like this.
When we come back, I want to talk to you about youth sports. We're both soccer dads of daughters. You had a bill that was signed last year. You have a follow-up this year. We're speaking with Brian Maienschein. For our viewers on HLN, we thank you for joining us. For our other viewers, we'll be right back. So, Assemblyman, as we just said, both father of 2 daughters, same age, both soccer players. I was stunned when you told me that for those that are acting as volunteers in these youth leagues, there's no bona fide, or there had been no bona fide background check.
Right.
Explain that.
Well, I think you and I's weekends are very similar.
Well, very
driving back and forth.
Right,
exactly. Sitting out in the sun, watching our daughters, play soccer. And I was a coach and am a coach for my daughters. I love it. But one thing that I did realize was that these coaches weren't undergoing a background check. And so last year we worked on that, made a lot of progress. This year my bill is kind of step 2 of that.
Let me back up, because I think you're being humble. Your bill was signed. And what did that bill say?
Well, that bill now, so youth sports leagues will now do background checks on coaches. So we'll know that, there are very bad people who want to be around children, and what better thing to do than go coach
youth sports teams. And how will that happen? Do you know, or is that for a regulation?
Yeah, how it will happen is actually the Department of Justice will do the background checks. They're actually free to the sports leagues. So it's kind of really, frankly, a no-brainer. And all of us who have children involved in sports, we want to know who's coaching them. If they have a sex offense in the background, that'd be a fact I think all parents would like to know.
Bill signed, but you're now looking to take it to the next level.
Yeah. So now the next step is we want leagues to make the parents aware of whether or not they've conducted these background checks. So now they will be required to advise, yes, hey, we've done background checks, they're available here, or we haven't done background checks and here's why. Just so the parent knows that this has happened, and so therefore they go in with an education as to who they are placing their children in care of.
How did you come to believe that we needed this addition, this fix?
Well, I really do think it was from coaching. I remember, coaching one practice, and all the parents came and dropped their children off, and they left. I remember thinking, if this is happening at practice I'm conducting, it's probably happening at practices all across the state. And there are, obviously the vast majority of people who volunteer to coach are good people. They're parents who care about spending time with their kids. But there are some, and we know the stories nationally, we know the stories statewide, we know the stories locally of people who have used their position of trust to violate young children.
I want to shift gears, if I may. Recently, Governor Brown offered his State of the State address. I know that you were there. I watched it as well. I saw a press release from some of the Republican leadership saying the governor sounds like more of a Republican every single day, which I thought was very interesting. As a general proposition, what would you say? What grade would you give to Governor Brown on the State of the State?
Well, I thought he did a good job, and I do. He's interesting to listen to.
No doubt.
He cuts to the chase, which I like. He's not a lot of pontificating up there or grandstanding.
Short, 17 minutes.
17 minutes, and that's the perfect length of speed. You're worried that this thing might drag out for an hour and a half.
Your audience.
Right.
And so on issues of fiscal matters, it's hard to deny that the state's in much better shape than it was in the last couple years. It's hard to deny that the governor has been very fiscally conservative. It's a loaded term, but I think you understand what I'm saying. He has made the creation or recreation of a rainy day fund one of his biggest priorities. Let's talk about that, if we may.
Yeah, I thought what he talked about up there was really good in the sense of, look, we do have some extra money, and don't you all spend it.
Right.
And he's right. There does need to be a rainy day fund. We know that it's volatile. It's particularly volatile in California. So this notion that, there's a surplus, and so I think there are some people who are very itchy to start spending it all. Look, this needs to be saved. We don't know what we're going to face over the next 10 years, but we can certainly say, I think, that there'll be a couple years in there that aren't going to be that good, and that this money needs to be there.
So there does seem to be bipartisan agreement on the need for a rainy day fund. But my question is, as a member of the Republican caucus, how do you become part of the conversation? I know that you're well liked amongst your Democratic colleagues, but still, technically they don't need Republicans. And so how do you participate?
Well, I think it does require a Republican. It has to work harder at it, because that is the political reality of Sacramento is that the Democrats have a 2/3 majority. So you are right on basically everything. They do not need Republican votes. I will say that I think there's a lot, particularly in the freshman class, who've come in who do want to work together. And I do think they'll
be together presumably for 12 years under the new term limit regime.
Exactly. And I think it's unlikely that it will be a 2/3 majority for the next 12 years. I just think
fair enough.
Historically that's unlikely. And so I think people who are thinking ahead a little bit realize that on both sides, realize that look, it's not always going to be this makeup forever. In the meantime, my people sent me here, my district sent me here. I'm going to work hard to represent them, and that means under the political dynamics we have up here, reaching out to Democrats. I've always done that as a member of the San Diego City Council. I did that, and I'll continue to do that up here.
Okay, his name is Brian Maienschein. He is a member of the California State Assembly representing significant portions of San Diego County. My name is Brad Pomerance. It's California Edition.